You know, you should be looking at the funder and how much money they've got and whether they're going to stand by you and whether they're going to be there when there's a personal cost order made against a liquidator, which we will be there.
Well,
we have very good cover on that one.
Hopefully I don't get one of those. But
yeah, you don't want one of those. Trusting the person that you're working with is such a massive thing, and enjoying being at work and working with these people is really important.
Absolutely. It's, that's like anything in terms of life or business. It's the way that those relationships are built, develop over time. That trust is fundamental in terms of how you approach things, particularly under stress, and obviously in litigation and mediations and those types of things, there is generally a level of stress because there's a lot riding on it, and it's definitely important to make sure that everyone's got each other's back when it comes to that stuff. Cathro and Partners presents The Cut, a podcast about all things insolvency. Welcome everyone to episode 4, season 2 of the Cathro and Partners, The Cut. Today we're very, very lucky to have one of my good friends who I've known in the insolvency space pretty much since I started in it, who's a mother. She's started in the law side of things, worked at a number of different firms, now at Omni Bridgeway as an investment manager in the litigation funding space. Heather Collins, welcome to The Cut.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Obviously, lots happening in terms of your life and obviously what's happening family-wise, work-wise, all sorts of things happening. Before we get into all of that stuff, I know I've known you for quite a while now, obviously friendly with my wife and all those types of things, but tell me a bit more about the HC story.
It's varied, very varied. And when I was a lawyer, I worked all over Australia. So I've worked in Darwin, North Queensland and Sydney, and I was a judge's associate down in Canberra. So one of those people that's been all over Australia, but I haven't travelled much overseas. But that means that I've met a lot of people. I've got lots of contacts. And then when I came back to Sydney, I have worked in a number of different law firms. I've worked in suburban, boutique, mid-tier, top tier, because I kept on thinking there must be a better one than this. But law firms are pretty much all the same, and it's about the people. And I met some amazing people while I was moving through all of those law firms, and that has served me really well as a litigation funder. Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's more like that in most professional services firm, not necessarily just law firms. It's the people, right?
Yeah, correct. It's who you're in the bunker with.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of, obviously, grew up in Adelaide?
No, I grew up in Sydney.
Sorry, Sydney, but you lived in Adelaide, you said.
Yes, I have lived in Canberra, North Queensland, so Townsville, Magnetic Island, Darwin, Adelaide. I think that's it. Yeah.
Just those few places, you know?
Yeah. I've seen a lot of Australia.
So in terms of, getting into law, what made you get into law in the first instance? Was there a thought process behind it? Did you have a mentor, mentee?
No, like I was seeing a guy who was in the army, which is why I moved around so much initially, and he got posted to Townsville, and I was working at the time. I was 21 years old, and I started looking for jobs up in Townsville, and there weren't many jobs, and they weren't that great. And so I thought I'd take the opportunity to go to university.
Yep.
And I was sitting down with the handbook trying to work out what I should do, and I was with one of my friends, and she said, "I think you should do law." And I was like, do you think I'd be okay at that? And she was like, "Yeah, I think you'd be great at it." And I was like, well, we'll apply and see if I, get in. And I loved it. It was hard. The first 2 years were pretty hard, trying to get your head around how to think like a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that I achieved that in the first 2 years or even throughout the whole degree, but certainly it got a lot easier.
I think you're doing it right
now. And so I went to James Cook University, and then I went to Adelaide University, and then I went to ANU. So that was a bit of a journey through all the different educational institutions.
Yeah.
it's fair to say I can cope with change pretty well.
I'd say so, yeah. It's that's quite an interesting way of getting through university. Three different ones?
3 different ones. And then I did articles in Darwin. So I didn't do the practical legal training that most people do because I still had articles in Darwin when I was there.
Wow.
So I was an article clerk 6 months. And then dizzy heights of being a lawyer.
Wow. Those dizzy heights, those dizzy heights.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. I didn't know that about you. So it's obviously something that I've learnt myself today. But, obviously you've gone through that process. You've moved around a lot. You've had some really varied experience in terms of your legal career. What, if you could distill it down into maybe 2 memorable circumstances, what would those be in that kind of realm?
I don't think I could distill it down into 2 circumstances. I think, working as a judge's associate for a year down in Canberra, that was an amazing experience, and I would encourage anyone to apply for those jobs because you get a real insight into how law works.
Yep.
I thought that, and I was really clear when I finished working as a judge's associate that litigation was where I wanted to be. Yep. So I was a bit different to the other article clerks that I started with at the time because they just had no idea what they wanted to do. And so doing that grad rotation through the different areas of the law firm was really helpful for them. But for me, all I ever wanted to do was litigation. And one of the things that made me stand out a bit because I was so clear.
Yeah.
So that was probably one of the big things. And then I've always loved litigation, and I loved being in courtrooms and I loved listening to the arguments. I didn't always love the day-to-day grind of being in a law firm and writing some really, really boring letters to the other side. So litigation funding is really my niche in terms of that sort of situation because I still get to be part of the litigation, still get to be in courtrooms, still get to think about strategy and how things work.
Yeah.
But I don't have to do the day-to-day grind of
the boring letters and the reply and thinking about, well, that's useless or that's not useless or, geez, they've got me there. Yeah.
And sometimes the impact of those letters is so minimal that you just kind of feel like it's a bit futile.
Yeah.
But, that's law.
Rolling the arm over, right? It's a process like anything else. Yeah. No, it's, in my dealings with you, you've always been really, really good at distilling sometimes complex legal arguments down into, well, you can go this way and here's the path you'll go down there, or you can go that way. Here's what I recommend. And I've really appreciated that as someone who uses lawyers all the time, having that ability for you to just give me that distilled version without having to get into the legalese of it. And generally you're right. So it's it's obviously the litigation funding space is perfect for you because you can go in there and you can provide that insight as well as obviously the background of being a litigator, right? Yeah,
and I think that's being on the other side of it and dealing with different lawyers, that is the thing that I find different as well. Like, because now I'm where you are, in a different sort of situation, but I really do have to deal with lots of lawyers all the time, and the ones that do that can cut through all of it and just tell you, these are your options, this is what I think, this is my recommendation, rather than going through every rabbit hole that you could go down, and being commercial and strategizing and making sure that the ones that stand out to me are the ones that are constantly thinking about how to ensure that it is the quickest way forward, it's commercial, and you're going to get to a resolution as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And who think about what I need.
Yeah.
Rather than the ones who just get bogged down in sending you 10-page advices that you really struggle to read through.
Yes.
You want that executive summary. Like, you read it, obviously, but clear, concise advice is amazing.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And it's like that commerciality aspect, obviously something that I deal with all the time. But it's interesting just the people that are involved in that space too. There's some very, very concise people and very, here's your options, here's what I recommend kind of people. And like you said, a lot of people that kind of get into the detail and when you're thinking about the audience that you're obviously in front of and what you're trying to achieve, that conciseness is something that I find valuable as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So you've done that. You've worked in a few different law firms. You've touched on some insolvency stuff. Now you find your way into litigation funding at Omni Bridgeway. Tell me about that. What's your experience been so far?
The experience has been great. I've got to say, I think, I've been at Omni Bridgeway now for 3 years, and before that I was at Baker McKenzie in restructuring and insolvency.
Yes.
And it's been, I've loved every minute of it because I get to do the due diligence on the matter, read all the documents, form the argument to the investment committee, push it through, then project management of it, and then lots of marketing. So it kind of plays to all of my skills, and so I really enjoy it.
Yes.
But certainly in the last 3 years, I've really learnt about what is a good case to fund and what isn't.
Yeah.
And it's probably taken me about 3 years in a few different matters to go, okay, I've got a really clear idea about what I want to see now and what will work and what won't work. So I think, probably takes an investment manager probably about 3 years to get up to that.
Up to speed.
Yeah. Which is, I don't know, I didn't think that was the case, but there is lots of pitfalls.
Oh, I'm sure. Litigation, like they say, sometimes it's the toss of a coin, and you might have an amazing argument, but if you get up there and someone slips up and the judge has had a bad morning, you know, who knows what's going to come out of it, right?
Correct. And, the best advice that I receive from barristers sometimes is, this is a great case, but at the end of the day, if the judge doesn't like your story, they might decide against you just based on the story that they don't like.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we're really focused on making sure that we settle matters as quickly as possible and achieve the best result, and we're constantly focused on the risks and how long things are dragging on and making sure that we can achieve the best result possible as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great way to approach litigation in anyone's eyes, I think.
Yeah.
So just in terms of matters that you're looking to fund, obviously there's a whole heap of different funders in the marketplace, particularly in my space, but I know you're working on some class action stuff too. What are you looking for in terms of, hey, I've got a matter, I want to talk to Heather at Omni and see whether there's a possibility that she'll fund it. How do I put that together? How do I package it up to help you get it in front of your investment committee and fund it?
So the key things that we look at are obviously the merits of the case. That's obviously incredibly important, but you can have a great case, but we still won't fund it if there's no recoverability. So we're going to be looking at what's behind it. Now, liquidators are always focused on that as well.
Yes.
So we're very aligned in that respect.
Yeah.
So those are the key things. And then the claim size. So whilst we, in Australia have historically worked on a lot of class actions, we started in insolvency. That's where we came from.
Yeah.
And there's been a real focus in making sure that we diversify our portfolio. And that's one of the reasons why I was hired at Omni Bridgeway. They wanted to get back into that insolvency space.
Yep.
So over the past 3 years, I've funded a few different insolvency matters, and some of them have been really small. I've got one at the moment that's a $2 million claim size, but the fund amount is only $165,000 because they came to us right at the end and they just wanted the money for the barrister's fees and disbursements just before the trial.
Yeah, right.
So that was, tiny, but it was worth doing.
Yeah.
Also they were looking at a really good piece of law, and so it was a bit novel and I really wanted to do it. So that's the smallest, but I think, generally it really has to be between 5 and 10 to make sure that there's an adequate return to creditors.
Sure.
And I am really focused on that.
Yep.
I don't want a situation, and I have had situations where all of the money comes to us and the lawyers.
Yep.
And that is really disheartening because I don't want to see that.
Yeah.
So that's why we have to be careful about the claim size. And I'm really, what I really like is when, we do seed funding for investigations and public examinations. And I find it really impressive when I have lawyers who come to me and say, look, this is the number of witnesses we could possibly publicly examine, but I think we're going to get the best from, the advisors, the lawyers, the directors in country, whatever it is.
Yes.
But they are really thinking about how to reduce the costs, making sure that the public examinations are really targeted.
Yep.
And ensuring they get the best result from a public examination, because sometimes public examinations can be completely useless.
Oh, you've got to be super prepared. You've got to have your ducks in a row and make sure that you've got your documents to take your examinees to, so that you can get those things on the record that you need to pursue a claim, right? It's some of them are quite dry to watch too, but in any case.
Yeah, so so we'll do all different sorts, but I have found that I think in the last 3 years I've thought really that 5 to 10 mark is probably the minimum.
Yep.
But again, if it's novel, if it's small and it's just a small application, it's quick and easy to get out of.
Yeah.
That I'm always interested in as well. And I was talking to an insolvency practitioner yesterday, and I was saying, when it comes to insolvency matters, if you've got a matter where you think it could work with funding, but you're not sure about the merits so much, and you want a second pair of eyes, then I'm really happy to kind of review the documents and form an opinion and say, yeah, look, this is something that I think is worth pursuing.
Yeah.
A little bit more difficult to do that on other matters like a intellectual property matter or something like that. But with insolvency, I'm pretty comfortable providing that first preliminary view. And then and we spend money on due diligence as well. We usually have about $20,000 that we could spend either getting a report from a valuer or an expert of some kind, or getting an opinion from counsel.
Yeah.
So we'll do that if we think that the case is a good one and we should push it through.
Sure. Yeah, it's always interesting from particularly my side of the fence thinking about that, and obviously there's different types of funding models. There's percentage of whatever settlement proceeds you've got, or it's plus cost, or sometimes you can build that in. It just depends on the circumstance, but it's definitely something that we are using more frequently in circumstances where we think there's good prospects, and even just going to get a counsel advice, and then obviously looking at PEs and things like that to firm up any claims is something that's very topical for us at the moment. And we've got a few that are being funded by the FEG Recovery Unit. I haven't had the opportunity to work with you yet, but I'm sure I will at some future point. So it's definitely an evolving space, and it definitely adds value from a creditor point of view too.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that people just need to think about as well is that we'll take assignments of claims as well. So if there's a litigation asset sitting there, then we're happy to take that from you.
Yes.
Like particularly first appointment, if there's a deed, a docker that's going to be entered into, it could be that we can be part of that process by paying for a litigation asset.
Yep.
So we're really interested in being creative and bespoke about the funding that we offer.
Sure.
And trying to work with liquidators and administrators to give them some money and give creditors back some money.
Yeah, well, that's what it's all about, right?
Yep.
It's what's in the interest of creditors overall, and trying to get a result from that side of things. Yeah,
and I think, one of the other things that we noticed as well historically was that sometimes funders had tried to play too much of a role in a piece of litigation and direct it, and we're very much a hands-off approach when it comes to these sorts of matters. We recognise that the insolvency practitioner is a professional litigant.
Yes.
They know what they're doing, generally have great lawyers, and so I'm just not interested in being a lawyer again. Like, I'm really happy to let people make the decisions that affect them. I want to be involved in mediation, obviously, choice of counsel and experts, but aside from that, I don't want to be writing letters.
There's a constant theme here, Heather. Yeah, there's no more letters, right?
Correct.
Yeah, very good. No, it's it's from your point of view, it's great that you've got that experience in terms of the insolvency side of things and running those matters, because obviously you'll see quite quickly in a lot of them, obviously everything's different, I get, but you'll see where the pitfalls are. You'll ask the right questions. You'll be able to, I don't know everything about litigation myself, even though I obviously have to contend with it quite often. It's always good to be able to bounce those kind of ideas and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or this is what we think it's going to cost to get to here. Is there a staged approach? Like, how should we be looking at it? So, yeah,
and I think that's the other thing that we offer. We've got a just in Sydney, there's a team of 9 investment managers who have varied experience. We've got ones who are experts in insurance law, or some that are class action lawyers, product liability. Like, we have an enormous amount of experience within the Omni Bridgeway team, and then globally as well in terms of enforcement and asset tracing. Yeah, we're first class. And so there's just when you come to us and a matter is funded by Omni Bridgeway, it's not just money that you're getting. Yeah. You get that expertise as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that's comforting, I guess, especially for cross-border stuff. And we all know it's interesting trying to enforce in different jurisdictions and who's on trial, who's not, and what are the prospects. And it's nice to know that there's that obviously insight too from your team that you can provide on top of just the funding side of things.
Yeah, and I found that one of the best parts about having the global team, like being able to access that kind of information is just awesome. We have a guy over in Singapore who I'm sure used to be a spy. He speaks 6 languages and he can find any asset anywhere. It's amazing.
I'll have to get his number off you. Jeez. I'm struggling to find a few myself at the moment.
Well, we're very good at it.
Very good. So obviously litigation funding, lawyer, what do you like to do outside of work? I know you're quite heavily involved in the industry. I know you're on the New South Wales Divisional Council at ARETA, previously with the president of WINC, Women Insolvency. Like, what else makes HC tick?
Family and friends.
Yeah.
Like, that's my sole focus. I always used to struggle with this question, on your CV, you're supposed to put your hobbies, and I'd be like, dinner parties?
You're good at those, I must admit.
And I just really like people. Like, I love people. I love making connections with people. I love having lots of people around my dinner table. And, I think it's an interesting thing when people ask you how, like, you get to where you are in your career.
Yep.
And I think maybe women are a bit different about this. Not all women, but some, and certainly me. There was no real clear plan about what I was doing.
Right.
I fell into insolvency when I came back from Magnetic Island, and I really liked it, but I knew no one.
Yeah.
And I would just meet, like, I'd walk into a room and I'd know no one going into these insolvency functions. But after, 5 or 6 years, I knew lots of people.
Yeah.
But I didn't meet people with a plan of, there's this person's important, I should speak to them, and then I can get this. And then I just really liked talking to people and made connections and always berated myself about the fact that I wasn't very good at, like, asking for work.
Yeah. It's different styles though, right? Some people are good at asking for work. Some people are just great at building relationships, and off the back of those, generally the work comes in any case, right?
Yeah, and I think that that's the case for me. It was like I didn't really have any real clear plan, but the way that I had managed my career meant that when I went into into litigation funding, everything that I'd done before made sense.
Absolutely.
And making connections with people that you like and enjoy being in the same room as, and I think in litigation funding as well, like, we're all pretty much of a muchness in terms of what we can offer you.
Yeah.
In terms of the funding terms. Yep. Obviously we can offer you that global situation, but really, again, it's about who you're in the bunker with. And when you're in a mediation or when you're in a piece of litigation that's really stressful, having a litigation funder there who is actually someone that you like, that you trust, that you enjoy working with is a big difference.
Oh, absolutely.
And it's the same with lawyers for you.
Yeah.
So, I have lots of friends and colleagues in the industry who are like, I just really like working with this person, Heather. So it's not that I don't want to do a funded matter with you. It's just that this is a great relationship, and I completely understand that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's how you should make those. That should be a factor in deciding out. You should be looking at the funder and how much money they've got and whether they're going to stand by you and whether they're going to be there when there's a personal cost order made against a liquidator. Which we will be there.
Yeah. Well, it's good
very good cover on that one.
Hopefully I don't get one of those. But.
Yeah, you don't want one of those. But, trusting the person that you're working with is such a massive thing, and enjoying being at work and working with these people is really important.
Absolutely. It's, that's like anything in terms of life or business. It's the way that those relationships are built, develop over time. That trust is fundamental in terms of how you approach things, particularly under stress. And obviously in litigation and mediations and those types of things, there is generally a level of stress because there's a lot riding on it. And not just for the litigation funder, but for whoever you're funding, plus whoever the stakeholders are on the other side. And it's definitely important to make sure that everyone's got each other's back when it comes to that stuff. So I know, obviously, you started in the industry, you fell into it, I fell into it as well. It's obviously, I think it's an industry that people do fall into, but a younger Heather walking into those events and obviously not knowing anyone, and what kind of advice would you give to some people that are potentially in that situation now or about to embark on that kind of journey?
Yeah, well, I think people you have that thing where you look at someone else and you're like, oh, they just do it so well, it's so easy for them.
Yeah.
It's not. It's really hard.
Yep.
Like, no one likes walking into a room where they don't know anyone. No one likes walking up to a group and just introducing themselves. But that's just what you have to do.
Yes.
Everyone gets anxious in those situations and you just have to push past it. And every event gets easier.
Yes.
Because you know one person, and name tags are great.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I know when I was younger and obviously developing my relationships and my networks, the same thing. I'd go to a CPA function and I'd be the youngest person in the room by far, and generally there's all these old heads that have been doing it forever, and you get to a point where you've just got to bite the bullet and go and introduce yourself and shake that hand and tell them your story, because you'll be surprised what comes out of it at the end of the day.
Yeah, and really listen to them as well. I think that that's one of the most important things, like listening to people, because then when you see them at the next event and you say back to them what they told you before, you ask them a question about their children, and it's clear you listened.
Yes, and I buggered up at the start saying you're from Adelaide. Excuse me.
No, everyone thinks that.
So we've touched on a number of things, obviously, today up until this point, but one thing I really wanted to get your insights on was what you see happening in terms of the global economy at the moment, what you're seeing from a litigation funding space. I mean, where's your crystal ball?
I mean, I'm not an economist, so that's probably a bridge too far for me. Obviously, I read everything that everyone else is reading.
Yes.
The cliff didn't happen. The tsunami of insolvencies didn't happen, but and still hasn't. We're certainly seeing a lot in the construction space. All of us are seeing a lot of that, which is sad, but, it usually is the canary in the mine when it comes to insolvencies. Yeah. So, I predict that there's probably a lot more of that going to happen. Retail has been unbelievably unscathed at the moment.
I don't know how that's happened.
Neither do I, but, it seems that Australians still like spending money notwithstanding interest rates going up, so great.
Yes, very good.
And I definitely think you can see there's an uptick. There has been since probably October last year. We were certainly seeing a lot more applications for funding.
Yep.
And whilst they were historical, most of them, we have been, or I particularly have been, really proactive in trying to speak to administrators when they're appointed, particularly in construction matters, because there's always got to be litigation assets sitting there.
Yes.
We have a great construction team globally. Whilst insolvency is my thing, I've spent a lot of time in working in firms like Colin Biggers and Paisley, who have a real construction focus. So I've spent a lot of time in construction.
Yes.
I also did a couple of secondments when I was at Baker McKenzie. One was at Lendlease and one was at Roads and Maritime Services. I was moonlighting as a construction lawyer during those periods.
Yes, you were.
It is also really easy to look like a superstar in somewhere like Lendlease when there's no insolvency practitioners and they ask you like the simplest insolvency questions and they think that you're amazing.
Well, you are amazing, but I mean, it's that insight, right? It just comes from the experience that you've got.
Insolvency generally, I think, it's only going to get busier, but it couldn't get any worse than what it was during COVID.
It's been a strange old time, right? We always pose that question to people who have come on, and 9 times out of 10, so everyone said, well, I've tried to predict something for the last 2, 3, 4 years, and whatever I've predicted hasn't come to the fore, so I'm just going to put my crystal ball away and plod along, and whatever comes, comes. And I think, like you're saying, what I'm seeing too is obviously an increase in the wind-up notices, the ATO getting more active, those types of things. And for the next probably 6 or 12 months, it'll just be interesting to see what happens in the retail space. Tom and I are doing a webinar on that in a couple of weeks too. So we've put together a white paper, which the listeners might be of interest. You and Simon have got some great experience in the retail space. Picked up some great appointments. So I would be interested in having a look. But yeah, retail, it's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it's so strange that it's not the first thing that has obviously pulled back, given the fact that interest rates have rocketed up so quickly and inflation and all of those types of things are pressing on people. But everyone seems to want to go out and have their Wagyu and their glass of red, apparently. And
yeah. Oh, I mean, that's the other thing I've seen in just in the last 3 months. There seems to be so many restaurant openings in Sydney.
So many.
I can't even keep up, and we both know I lunch a lot.
You do, as do I. It's definitely interesting in that space, given everything else that's happening. But maybe they know something we don't, HC.
Maybe they do. Well, they certainly know how to make some beautiful food.
That is true. That is true. So in terms of the stuff that you're looking at in terms of funding at the moment, I'm going to mention this, and feel free to cut it if you like, but I know that you're helping out in terms of the Medibank class action that's happening at the moment, given the data breaches. What are you seeing in that space in terms of cyber security? What's happening there? Well, what do you think is going to come out of that?
Well, I mean, I can give you the insight that I'm getting from Ryan Grant at Baker McKenzie, because he has that real focus on cyber.
Yes.
And, before the Optus privacy breach, he was really trying hard to get into corporates and speak to them about privacy and how important it was, and speak to directors, and wasn't getting a lot of traction. Mm. And now he's the biggest man on earth. He seems to be traversing the country, constantly speaking to all different corporates about what their obligations are and what they can do to protect themselves against these sorts of class actions.
Yeah.
I think, the Medibank privacy breach class action is a novel claim. Mm. It's something that people have been trying to get their heads around for a while as to how they can prove that damage.
Yeah. And
I think Bakers have done a good job of working out the way through.
Yep.
So it's an interesting case. Lots of Australians have been affected by it, so we're really proud to support those people and make sure that they can get some money back for the distress that they've encountered, because some of the stories are pretty horrific about the information that's been released.
Yeah, there was obviously, they had their little hit list as to who had been naughty and who'd been nice. And yeah, it must be pretty distressing for those individuals to have that information released about them.
Yeah, it certainly is. So I'm happy to work on those. Look, I'm made a point of kind of staying away from the class action space when I first started in funding, because we have so many great class action people at Omni Bridgeway who have an incredible amount of experience.
Yes.
So I haven't really focused on it, and the only reason that I kind of changed was because it was a different one. It wasn't a securities class action where we have lots of depth of knowledge and experience. It wasn't product liability. It was completely different. And so what I'm focusing on when it comes to class actions is, and Omni Bridgeway as well, is, doing ones that are a bit different, because the class action space has obviously become incredibly competitive.
Yes.
And funders need to be really careful about what they fund and how they fund things in that space. So, the connections that I've got in all the different law firms is really serving me well in that sort of situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's the people it's people bringing us different class actions that have something that's not your average which is what we're looking at funding now.
Yeah, it's a scary place to be. I don't know about you, but I'm getting text messages telling me they're from the ATO or CommBank saying that I've got to change my password or linked to, I'm going to get extra toll charges that I haven't paid apparently. It's quite surreal that there's that amount of intense scrutiny from hackers and from people trying to rip everyone off, I guess, even from just a personal perspective.
Yeah, I think, most of us don't go a day without receiving one of those text messages.
Yeah, that's right.
And hats off to our IT people, because the education that I've probably been under for the past 3 years from our IT people about all the different scams and the phishing and things like that, thank God.
Yeah, well, I had one the other day. One of our team, Charlie, he sent me a message saying, "Oh, what's up? I've just got an email from you." I'm like, hang on a second, that didn't come from me. And I'm not quite sure how this has come about, but he got a personal email to his personal email address from someone pretending to be me, mentioning Cathro and Partners. It's quite like, I don't know how they got access to this stuff. Like, where's it coming from? How do we then deal with it, right?
Yeah. Well, and I have a friend who's the CEO of a company, and his finance person received an email from him telling him to transfer $3 million immediately, and he did it.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was a few years ago now, but everyone has to be really careful. But the hacker thing, obviously people's security needs to be beefed in terms of corporates, and directors really need to focus on that, and they haven't. They really haven't. The other space that we're looking at is ESG. We're encouraging directors to be really careful about their ESG responsibilities, because I think that is a real growth area for class actions as well.
Yeah, it's, just use of information, how it's stored, how it's kept, does it need to be kept, how long should it be kept for?
Yeah.
All of those types of things are obviously going to become more pressing given what's been happening lately in terms of these data breaches, and people have got to be vigilant as to what their responsibilities are when it comes to maintaining people's personal data.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great outcome from the whole Optus Medibank sort of situation, is that corporates will now be really focused on that and making sure that our information is kept private.
Yes. It's it's always been something that's been top of mind for me. When you get a phone call saying, "Oh, can you tell me your date of birth and your address?" I'm like, "Well, can you tell me yours?" It's one of those
I'll call you
spaces.
back.
Yeah, I'll call you back. Give me a number to call you back on.
Yeah. And I think, it's lucky for us because we are aware of it and we're constantly educated about it, but older Australians aren't.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's, it's a really hard space for them as well.
Yeah, can't imagine my grandma being able to respond the way that I potentially respond to a text message or a phone call from someone overseas pretending to be the big bad ATO.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly something that's going to continue to emerge, I guess.
Yeah.
In terms of other things that you're seeing from a litigation funding space and how you approach them, I'm going to come back to just thinking from my point of view. When's a good time to be talking to you? Is it straight after an appointment? Is it 6 months into it? What's the process?
Look, if you've got a big appointment, the last thing that you're going to be thinking about is a litigation funder, but
it depends on who you are.
But I'd encourage people to come and talk to us as quickly as possible, identify the claims. If they want help identifying the claims, we can also help them with that. But at any point in the process, we're happy to talk to people. We're happy to talk to them at appeal. We're happy to talk to them right before a trial.
Yep.
At any point, we can do that. That one that I was telling you about where they just wanted the money to take them through to the trial. The other thing that they wanted was adverse cost cover from the commencement of the proceedings.
Yep.
Not usually something that we do, but we do consider it when it comes to liquidators because we know it's a really important thing for liquidators to have because of the personal liability. So we did extend adverse cost cover to that liquidator from the commencement of the proceedings. At any point we're happy to chat and consider funding. It's just there's no cut-off point really for us.
Yeah, okay. No, it's good to know, especially for those out there in the industry that are listening, obviously pick up the phone, make the call, have the discussion, and away you go. And you don't know what's going to come from it, but always happy to obviously bounce ideas from that side of things. So that's good to know.
Yeah, and you know, liquidators and lawyers of liquidators are really focused on thinking about litigation funding as an option, which is really great. But lawyers probably need to think about it more in other situations as well. Corporates should consider using corporate, litigation funding. They've got no risk funding. They don't see it on their balance sheets. They see it only at the end if there's a settlement or a successful resolution. So it's surprising in Australia that corporates aren't using it more. It's certainly something that we use in the UK and the US. And it's a funny thing because Australians were early adopters of litigation funding in the insolvency space, but it really just hasn't carried over into corporates, and it's a surprising sort of thing.
Yeah, it's so strange because that's available, right?
Yeah.
And, I mean, at the end of the day, 70% of something's better than 100% of nothing. And
Correct.
If you've got something there that you think there's good prospects and someone's willing to come and support you in terms of pursuing it, then why wouldn't you do it? And I guess that's something it's not something that I would widely think about either, but now that you brought it to my attention, something that people should be thinking about.
I think general counsels in big corporates get worried about the level of control that we might have on the piece of litigation, and that's just it's not a concern that they need to be worried about in terms of control, because they will still have control of the proceedings. They'll be giving the instructions. In class actions, we take control, but that's because we're representing a class, and we always talk to the representative member. But but in corporates and insolvency matters, the liquidator or the corporate remains in control, giving instructions.
Yeah. No, it's good to know that that's available. And as I said, it's not something I'd thought about either, aside from having my own liquidator hat on. So.
Yeah, and I think what it needs to be considered, like liquidators or administrators need to, you're now giving restructuring advice.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you always were giving restructuring advice, but think about litigation funding when you're doing restructuring, because, as I said, there might be a litigation asset in there that, you can get some more money in for it. Like, everyone's cash poor at the moment.
Yeah, I'll take some pressure off the old cash flow, which is king in those circumstances. So.
And especially in construction companies.
Yeah, it's, offsets and defects and holes in contracts. It's just a minefield when it comes to that. Yeah,
and so one of the other things that we're looking at is making sure that, like, construction companies can get money in the door, and, sometimes they're not making, Security of Payment Act claims because they want to keep the other side on side and we'll do it at the end. Don't do that.
Yeah.
We can fund it. We'll get it through. You get that payment claim and you've got more cash in.
Yeah, exactly. So what about the future? What's in the future of HC? What's she thinking in terms of litigation funding space, life? Where are we at?
Getting my children to the age of 18, happy and healthy.
That's always probably top of the list, I'd suspect.
And litigation funding, it's constantly changing, and that's really great.
Yes.
And there's massive variety. So, just being really open and continuing to connect with people as much as possible and constantly thinking outside the square, because, it is an evolving space and you do need to be open to all opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's it'll be interesting to see what comes out of these Medibank class actions, and obviously the evolving stuff when it comes to cybersecurity. And like you said, if you're open to those potential new opportunities and the spaces that you may or may not play in at the moment, there's obviously only upside from your point of view.
Yeah, and we've always been really interested in doing those sorts of groundbreaking cases.
Yeah.
So, I would encourage people to come and talk to us as much, as often and quickly as possible.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for your time, Heather. It's obviously been great speaking to you today. I really appreciate your insights, and I'm looking forward to obviously working with you in the future and catching up for one of those dinner parties at some point.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in to Cathro and Partners, The Cut. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. For more insights, please visit cathropartners.com.au or feel free to like our LinkedIn and other social pages.